Tonight on Primetime Politics, fallout.
If the United States no longer wants to lead, Canada will.
Canada stakes its position against Donald Trump's global trade war, announcing counter tariffs on American-built vehicles and support for Canadians who are already paying a financial price for the Trump tariffs. Coming up, we'll explore what the future holds for Canadian workers and the economy. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, Canada is giving its official response to the global tariffs announced by Donald Trump yesterday afternoon, noting while Canada was not specifically targeted, our auto, steel, aluminum, potash, and energy industries are still subjected to American tariffs. A clear signal to the Prime Minister that Canada's once close relationship with the United States is now a thing of the past.
Yesterday's actions by the U.S. administration, while not specifically targeting Canada, will rupture the global economy and adversely affect global economic growth. Our old relationship of steadily deepening integration with the United States is over. The 80-year period when the United States embraced the mantle of global economic leadership, when it forged alliances rooted in trust and mutual respect, and championed the free and open exchange of goods and services, is over.
Now, in that same news conference, Mark Carney, in his capacity as Prime Minister, announced that Ottawa will impose a 25% tariff on U.S.-made vehicles, but the tariff will not apply to vehicles that are CUSMA compliant, nor will they apply to vehicles made in Mexico, nor on auto parts. And the government is also promising to provide federal relief to automakers that continue to invest and produce goods in Canada. So a plan to hit back, but the pain of Trump's tariffs are already being felt in Windsor, Ontario, where today Stellantis announced that its assembly plant in that city will shut down for 2 weeks starting April the 7th. That puts more than 3,000 people out of work, with more schedule changes expected in the weeks to come. And as for the automaker, it did issue a statement. It reads in part as follows: Stellantis continues to assess the effects of the recently announced U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles and will continue to engage with the U.S. administration on these policy changes. Immediate actions we must take include temporarily pausing production at some of our Canadian and Mexican assembly plants, which will have an impact to several of our U.S. powertrain and stamping facilities that support those operations. Well, for some reaction to all this, we're now reaching out to the Mayor of Windsor, Drew Dilkens. Mayor Dilkens, thank you for joining us this evening again.
Thanks very much, Michael.
So, immediately after Trump makes this announcement, Stellantis on its own announces this temporary shutdown. They also talk about possible shift changes in future. So let's start there. I'm wondering if you've heard about any other future disruptions that may be coming down the pipes for your city.
No, this was the first and the biggest, and happened right away, as you can tell. Stellantis is our largest employer. The Windsor Assembly Plant makes the Chrysler Pacifica and the Grand Caravan, which of course is sold all throughout North America and around the world. And so to see Stellantis launch a shutdown for 2 weeks, and to hear that it's happening in Mexico and it will also affect U.S. plants, I think this is just the start of many unfortunate things to come as a result of Donald Trump's announcement yesterday.
Okay, just the start. Are you fearful then that we might be looking at the assembly moving south of the border? Because ultimately that is what Donald Trump wants to see happen.
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but of course that's always in the back of our mind. Any mayor would have that in the back of their mind, absolutely, especially because it is our largest employer in the community. But I also know that there are two fallacies that Donald Trump's narrative is based on, and that is that there are hundreds of billions of dollars of available capital just waiting to be invested in the United States, and that is not the case. And the other fallacy is that there are just all sorts of workers waiting to take all of these jobs that purportedly are moving to the United States. And we know that the U.S. has about 4% unemployment today by any economic standard that is considered full employment in an economy. And if you look in my community, where we have one of the largest tool, die, and mold clusters in all of North America, that is an expertise that has been built up over the better part of 100 years. These folks are not just moving to the United States tomorrow. And so there are two fallacies that underpin the president's argument. But based on what he's done, trying to reorder global trade and the announcement with tariffs that he made yesterday, certainly there's an impact in the markets. There's an impact in my community today. And I would expect that you'll see these ripples continue to take effect, including at plants in the United States.
You know, I think sometimes we get caught up in the numbers, because ultimately when we talk about Stellantis temporarily pausing production, what we're talking about are thousands of people being laid off temporarily. And if there are future changes, perhaps even longer than expected, what type of pain will this cause for Windsor and the people who live in your community?
Well, two weeks is not going to be catastrophic for the community, but it's what happens after that, and recognizing that the tariffs that the president put in place, you know, there are some exemptions for vehicles that where the parts are made in the United States, but that really requires, if you think about the mechanics here, it really requires every automaker to dissect all of the parts in every vehicle that they make that crosses the border 6 to 8 times before it's placed in a vehicle for final assembly, and figure out which of those parts is made in the United States, is going to another country for continuous improvement. And how many parts would that be? Well, the average vehicle, 30 to 40,000 different parts. And of course, a lot of these parts are made in the US and Canada and Mexico, but you have chips and circuit boards coming over from Taiwan and from China. You have cable harnessing, wire harnessing coming from different countries. Siemens is making things in Germany, sending them over. And so it is a very complex system that has been built here. And the unfortunate part of all of this, Michael, is that we have built this together. This is not Canada, contrary to the president's remarks, Canada stealing the auto industry from the United States. We have built this together since the 1960s. And so it's unfortunate to see the impact that will be that is taking effect as of today in Windsor, but will certainly cascade throughout the auto industry and the parts sector in the weeks to come.
Yeah, you know, I wonder as well, because we're talking about, at the very least, the status quo, perhaps that restoring after 2 weeks' time. But, you know, as a civic leader, I'm sure you're always looking beyond the status quo, trying to grow your community, trying to grow the prosperity in your community. But given this uncertainty right now, what does it mean for future investment in Windsor and the hopes of your city to grow and provide more for the people there?
Well, it's concerning. Of course, it's the type of thing that keeps me awake at night. But let me just tell you, today, we just had an announcement with a company called Mint, which is a global auto parts supplier. They're investing $300 million to open their 78th factory that they have in the world here in Windsor. They're going to employ 1,100 people. Despite the announcement yesterday, they continued to come here and say, we still think this is a good investment to make at this location at this time. And so that's really positive news. But our largest employer, Stellantis, is critical for the community's success. And we have done everything for more than 100 years to support that operation in the city of Windsor. They're here because the men and women who work there make quality vehicles. There's a reason they're in Canada. And so are we concerned that, you know, at some point in the future, this could move somewhere else? Well, of course we are. And that's why I'm happy to see our government moving forward with some retaliatory tariffs. And I think that's the first thing to come. You are going to see all sorts of countries, including the European Union and other countries, move to band together to figure out how to defeat, in a quick order, I hope, to defeat the tariffs that are being put in place by the United States, to send the pain signals through the economy back to the U.S. to get the president to reconsider a position that we know is not in the best interest of his own residents.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned being happy with the counter tariffs that Ottawa is pushing through. We're also hearing from various political leaders. For example, Pierre Poilievre today talks about removing the GST on Canadian-built vehicles as a way of helping the auto industry. We heard Mark Carney today making the promise of investing $2 billion in terms of perhaps retooling the Canadian auto industry to make a far more Canadian infrastructure around building a Canadian product. What's your reaction to those proposals? Do either of those strike you as something that is worthwhile pursuing right now?
Well, I think Pierre Poilievre's comment certainly is bright, because right away that can be implemented and would have an immediate impact to give a boost to the Canadian auto sector. So that's something that could be done short term. Let's see it happen and implement it right away. Longer term, what the Prime Minister is talking about, rebuilding and sort of repatriating supply chains in the auto parts sector back to Canada. Interesting concept. It's going to take a lot longer to do that. Also predicated on the fact that there has to be hundreds of millions and hundreds of billions of dollars available to move factories factories to Canada. So certainly a long-term plan. But you know what? Both of those things working in concert with each other, and anything one can do today to help us get through this difficult period that we're going to be going through collectively, not just as a city, but our country. Frankly, there's going to be pain in our continent, and you're going to see pain around the world. And the fear, I think, for everyone is that this is going to lead to some form of global recession that, ultimately is not good for anyone. We're in a very difficult spot if that happens.
Mayor, quickly running out of time, but I'm wondering what your outreach has been to Stellantis, whether or not you've been able to perhaps get some type of comforting word about the future ahead from that company.
Yeah, you'll never get that from Stellantis or Ford or GM. These guys are operating in a very globally competitive environment. And so to see a pause here, thinking and going back to the 30,000 part and component comment, Michael, it's right for them now to take a pause and figure out whether they can make money making vehicles and what they have to charge for these vehicles. And I think in very short order, you're going to see the price of the vehicles rise between $4,000 and up to $12,000 as the companies have to readjust the price of the vehicle to now take into effect the tariffs that are being applied from all sorts of different countries that apply to all the different components that are feeding into the manufacture of that vehicle. And so they're all going to be all the OEMs are going to be doing this calculation and figuring out what the future looks like for them. Unfortunately, there's disruption, and it disrupts families and communities like mine while all of that work happens.
Okay. Well, of course, we'll speak again in the future, but Drew Dilkens, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So, Windsor is just one city affected by the Trump tariffs, but the impact is countrywide as Trump is applying tariffs on several Canadian industries. Take a listen to what we heard today from the premiers.
Today, we know with the President's announcement last night that some Canadians are taking a breath, and some are still being impacted. But well, it appears that Canada will not have been hit with the worst case scenario in terms of tariffs. Thousands of Nova Scotians will still be impacted by the announcement.
It's not the biggest part of our economy, but we sell $100 million of auto parts out of British Columbia here that are potentially subject to an up to 25% tariff effective at midnight. Everyone's still, including companies like Stellantis, still trying to figure out what is in and what is out. But we are under attack by the president, and what is required here is ensuring that we're standing up for all of these sectors, all of these workers in our province, and we're going to continue to do that.
We all agreed that we got the best of a bad deal, which in my opinion is still totally unacceptable. The only thing that's acceptable is zero tariffs. We're going to continue targeting zero tariffs. I do believe, and I would support retaliation tariffs, very similar to what they have against us in the auto sector.
Well, with that, let's bring in now B. Bruske, President of the Canadian Labour Congress. B, thank you for taking time this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, let's start with Stellantis here, this 2-week pause at the Windsor assembly plant. It does make me wonder, what can workers actually do to fight back when all of this is happening way beyond the assembly line?
Well, listen, the reality is that Stellantis is the first example of major layoffs, right? And we understand that that's for a 2-week period of time. But we've already had permanent layoffs already in the steel and aluminum industry just within the last couple of weeks with the already existing and previously announced tariffs in that particular industry. The amount of job losses that we're looking at here is substantial. And it's not just the immediately impacted workers that are worried, it's the workers within those communities, because we know that for every job that is lost, there are ripple effects throughout various different components of society, quite frankly, that will be impacted. So first and foremost, what we from the labor movement are looking for is strong worker supports. We want to make sure that all levels of government are making sure that workers are protected, that their jobs are protected first and foremost, but where there has to be a layoff or where there is a break in service, so to speak, that there are strong social safety nets that are going to capture those workers, making sure that our employment insurance system is very robust, making sure that workers can access training while they may be off, making sure that there is job growth potential in other industries within that community is critically important.
Okay, listen, let's break that up a little bit, beginning with the actual impact. Because, you know, when you talk about Stellantis in Windsor, you're talking about 3,500 jobs. But of course, you're in communication with unions and associations right across the country. How many jobs are we looking at that could be on the line with these tariffs, especially if this is a prolonged tariff trade war with the United States?
So based on the current tariffs that have already been announced, we know that there are 123,000 steel and aluminum jobs that are at stake. There's about 128,000 automotive-specific tariff jobs that are at stake, and then the spin-off components and the other jobs within those supply chains and within those communities, that adds up to another 463,000 jobs. So we're talking over 500,000 jobs just in these two industries alone. And, you know, I'm not convinced that this is the end of tariff threats from the White House. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. It seems that the decisions are being made on the fly by tweet at 2 in the morning about what the next threat is. So even if you're not in that initial announcement, that your industry is not in that initial announcement of having to face increased tariffs, there's just still a significant uneasiness by all workers across the country about what the next week and the next month and the next year is going to bring.
What do you tell them? Because, of course, here you are leading the labor movement, right, that is national in scope. When workers ask you, what does the future hold, what do you tell them?
What I tell them is the labor movement is very cohesive in terms of our demands. Regardless of which kinds of workers various different unions are representing, everybody is sticking together on the main message, and that is that we have to have each other's back. And that has to start with electing a federal government that's going to put workers first, that's going to fix our broken social safety net, that's going to invest in the jobs of the future, that's going to be hitting back hard when a bully is coming to actually want to try to, take our jobs away, that we're going to be standing up strong in the face of a bully and defending ourselves. And that has to mean counter tariffs and other countermeasures. It has to mean finding new ways of training for jobs. It has to mean looking at the jobs of the future, as we also have to pivot to a green economy. And it has to mean really income supports at every level at this moment in time to get people through the next number of weeks, months, and years.
Okay, and part of that is, as you said earlier, more robust EI. What does that look like?
So we know that just before the election was called, Prime Minister Carney made some adjustments to the employment insurance system, and we appreciated that, and we've long been calling for a more significant overhaul. We know that right now only 2 in 5 workers, when they apply for EI, actually qualify for EI. The amount of benefit level for workers is very, very minimal. And for most workers, that's not going to make sure that they can pay the rent or pay the mortgage and put groceries on the table if, in fact, there is a job interruption. So a much more robust employment insurance system, a much more robust training system while folks are off on EI, having pathways to cushion workers that are close to retirement. We heard some enhanced job sharing. That's great. We need to expand those kinds of things. We need to look at furlough programs that keep workers tied to their employers, so that if there's a period of time where there's a stop in operations, that workers are still connected to that employer and to that community. You know, we heard it from the mayor of Windsor that these jobs are not easily replaced jobs in terms of the workers doing the work. These are jobs that take skill and ability. And so when you lose some of those workers in the communities in which these jobs exist, even when they come back, you cannot just fire up the engine, so to speak, and have those workplaces functioning again. So we need to make sure that we keep workers connected to the communities wherever possible with the proper income supports in those communities.
There's also talk of turning to public works, to public infrastructure programs as a way of redirecting labor. Is that the type of solution you're also looking for?
Absolutely. We need, there's lots of investments that are needed across Canada right now. We keep talking about housing needs, and we know that investments in infrastructure spending, investments in some of the priorities that we've long had in terms of improving our rail system, improving roads, improving ports. Those are all things that create jobs at this time. We need to look at those things, but not only do they create jobs, they also give us an opportunity to, in the long term, broaden our markets and to get our products and services to other trading partners.
So quickly running out of time, I want to ask, what are you going to do now? Now that we have these tariff announcement from Trump and the counter tariff from Ottawa, what do you see as your job one now?
My job one is to make sure that everyone is on the same page in the labor movement. And that means also speaking to our U.S. labor movement counterparts. That means working hand in hand with our American unions to make sure that workers in the United States also understand the threat of these tariffs, not just on the Canadian side of the border, but also on the American side of the border, that we try to exert as much political pressure on both the Canadian government for worker supports and the investments that we spoke about, but also on the American government to make better decisions.
Bruske, appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, Mark Carney did suspend his Liberal campaign to deal with the Trump tariffs yesterday and today. He will return to the campaign trail this evening. As for what we heard from the opposition parties, well, let's begin with the BQ leader, Yves-François Blanchet, who says Quebec must have a representative in any tariff negotiation with the United States. And as for the other party leaders, here is what we heard.
A new Conservative government will eliminate the federal sales tax on Canadian-made automobiles. Everyone who's looking to buy Canadian, to support Canadian workers, will be able to save money as a result of this announcement. Axing the GST on a $50,000 Canadian-made automobile will save $2,500 to the car buyer.
During the World War, victory bonds raised more revenue than taxes because Canadians were so committed to doing their part. So right now for Canadians who are wondering, how can I contribute? A victory bond would be a guaranteed investment where you would purchase a bond, a 5-year or 10-year, and if you hold it to maturity, you would get all the revenue tax-free. So it's a way to, we're going to need to raise money to be able to build the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure we need.
The Green Party of Canada believes that this is our moment, not to react, but to lead to build the strong democratic manufacturing capacity that the rest of the world will be looking after as Donald Trump continues to trample democracy at home, but also push his allies and allies of the United States away from the U.S.
So what can Canada do to build resiliency and to build the economy against such powerful trade barriers? Well, that actually is a matter that the Business Council of Canada has been putting some thought into. Goldy Hyder is the Council's president and the CEO. Goldy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
Listen, before we get into that, why do you think the Trump administration is doing this? This is hitting Canada, but this is a global trade war.
Yeah, well, that's a great question because, you have to believe that there's a plan, that there is a strategy. And while we question whether it's the right thing to do for not just themselves, but for us and the rest of the world, they got elected. And they're driven by this goal to, A, reindustrialize America. I mean, they're convinced that the high dollar, which many other currencies are keeping low, has shed jobs. So they want jobs back. They also know they have to have a good economic framework, so they got to pay down that deficit. They're running their Doge. They want to raise taxes and revenues from what they think are going to be paid by other people. And finally, they still are the G1. So they're an attractive place for investment. They want that investment to come there. What used to be America that cared about the world, America cares about America now. And you know what? That's their prerogative. It's what we do about it now that matters.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about that because, what is the practical impact on this? We're getting a sense of it now. We have an assembly plant shut down for a couple of weeks in Windsor already, but that's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, and look, I mean, a lot was said yesterday, that we were able to dodge additional tariffs. But let's not forget the fact that there are tariffs in place. They're in place on aluminum, they're in place on steel and autos, and we shouldn't forget the consequences of having the tariffs on the agriculture industry from China, which is actually costing a lot of money for Canadians as well. And so there is going to be, job losses potentially. There could be shutdowns, there could be inflation, there could be higher interest rates as a result in the long run. So that none of that bodes well for an economy that's frankly not growing. And so we need to ensure that we act in a measured and strategic way where you maximize harm on them and minimize pain on us. But you also need to use this moment to kind of pivot and to add, if you will. You're not going to leave America. We're going to continue to do business with America. We should stabilize our relationship with a new review and renewal of the USMCA. I still don't think that's off the table. But this is also a wake-up call for Canada.
Okay, let's talk about that now, because the Council has created essentially this roadmap to try and meet this moment. And in that roadmap, the Council talks about strengthening Canadian industries, embracing Canada's energy advantage, expanding high-growth sectors. Let's begin with that last point first. What high-growth sectors do you think Canada needs to be focusing on?
Well, look, at the end of the day, Canada is seen for its natural resources first and foremost. And so what the world says, I was just in Germany at Hanover Messe, Canada is a sponsoring country, and people are saying, look, what you have, we need. And that's the other thing about what the United States has been doing. They're not coming at us because we're a nice place to occupy. They are interested in us because of the resources that we have. But we landlocked ourselves too much. We have been too dependent on a single economy. We have to diversify. We have to build the trade arteries. And I'm talking about expanding your ports, your railways, your roads and bridges and airports, all of those trade arteries so that we can get products west and east. Let business decide what it does. You set the rules in government, and we'll figure out whether it's a business case or not. That's up for us to do. But there are opportunities to sell to others. The second side of this, of course, is in an environment in which the world is reorienting potentially, you have to think about supply chain integrity. What are some of the things that you're going to need to make sure that you have access to in case the Americans do proceed and follow through with really being, cutting you out in some way, shape, or form? And finally, the opportunity around, big issues of our time: climate change, innovation, AI, quantum. This is all about the strength of our human resources. And while we have some issues with our immigration system that need to be fixed, we still have very smart people here, and we're going to continue to attract smart people to compete.
Okay, attract smart people, but the government might lay out policies to address things like deep water ports or infrastructure, but ultimately you need to be able to attract capital to this country. So how do you do that when, as you said, the G1 nation's our neighbor?
Yeah. Well, look, the resources are where they are. They are in the ground here. And so the investment that's going to have to come is going to have to come to Canada. One of the reasons it came to Canada is because it has access to the U.S. market and more broadly to North America. That's 500 million people and arguably the richest continent in the world. And so you want to preserve that. You want to maintain that. It's why, we've been saying, listen not to what the president says, but pay attention to what he doesn't say. Don't just watch what the president does. Watch what he doesn't do. And what I've not seen, and I have no reason to believe so far, is he's saying, I'm going to do away with the USMCA. I don't want any agreements with Canada or Mexico. He's not said that. They are definitely being aggressive with us on a number of things, and some things we are legitimately being called out, like defense. On the other hand, we need to find a way to get all of this off the television sets and into a room where Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans can sit down and figure out, how do we preserve what is his deal, a deal he called the greatest of all time. Let's make it even greater by working together. That's the message we're trying to push.
Okay, but how do you attract investment?
Well, the investment comes from the stability of being able to say, we offer stability here. What you're seeing down south is not going to be happening here. We have the resources. We do have the skilled labor. Yes, there's some issues to work out, but we have it. We have 15 trade agreements with 51 countries, so you can become a reliable partner, you can be a resilient partner, and you can deepen your relationships. This is an opportunity for Canada to really play to our strengths. We're a multicultural society here. We have connections all the way back to our respective countries where people have come from. We have trading agreements with many of those countries. We just haven't built the infrastructure at the level that it needs to be done. And so my ask of our government when they're elected, whomever that is talk less, do more. Let's get stuff done, because if you don't do it now, then you have only yourself to blame. Okay, what type of timeline do you think we have? Well, yesterday is too late, so let's get going as fast as possible. There's no reason it would take 14 years to access a mine. You have to keep up with best practices, and you have to respond to this moment. It's an emergency. It's urgent. You can't treat it like it's just another day. Okay. Goldy, Hyder, appreciate the time. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Michael. Well, before we go tonight, we also want to know how the markets have reacted today to Trump's trade war, with fears of a global recession on investor minds. Take a look. Stock indices right across the board. The Dow Jones down almost 4%, the NASDAQ down almost 6%, the TSX shedding 3.84%. This also happened in markets around the world. And in North America's case, markets suffered their worst one-day loss since the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic back in 2020. So how the markets affect future decisions from the U.S. White House is, of course, something that we're watching very closely for you. But for now, that is Primetime Politics for this Thursday, day 12 of this federal election campaign. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.